To the Anti-Label People by Rose Whitson Geddes, aka A Girl Outside the Box. This is a letter to the anti-label people. I felt compelled to write this because I have been met with criticism amongst some people for in which I share like-minded beliefs regarding health, the environment, and global reform. I really need to explain why I feel hurt and frustrated when I try to identify as autistic and am shut down with the assumption that I am labeling myself with some sort of illness and that I'm playing the game of what is bad about society. I don't need to be told that over-labeling is a very negative thing. I know this full well. However, I'm not labeling myself. I'm merely self-identifying with the basic typology in which I feel represents my brain wiring. There is proof in facts, presentational consistencies, and neurological studies. There is science behind the general typology of autistic brain wiring. Again, I'm not overly fond of labels either, but the majority of society is, and this particular label serves as a way to potentially protect me from further misunderstanding, and therefore further discrimination. This is what I mean when it comes to receiving a diagnosis of autism as a result of an evaluation and identification of clinical traits. I myself met these traits after a careful and thorough examination, which included my live childhood video footage. In this sense, I have technically been labeled. I explain why I sought this for myself above. I can further elaborate by saying I was discriminated against. I was unfairly misjudged and erroneously mislabeled with mental disorders that I do not have. I was having persistent difficulty in various areas of my life, for in which I needed support and advocacy, such as medical and vocational. I also needed more insight into understanding my learning differences and how I could have them work for me, not against me. My diagnosis had brought me support and accommodation when it comes to occupational and educational endeavors, which is great. I plan to utilize more of it this year with regards to my writing and my art. Lastly, I do continue to be discriminated against at times. My diagnosis isn't necessarily a cure for this, though it helps. I have to accept and rise above the fact that some discrimination may always be inevitable, just as I would have to if I were gay or transsexual. Many people have a hard time obtaining the official diagnosis of autism. This is due to red tape in the current diagnostic criteria for autism. Despite this, many people choose to self-identify, as the description of autistic traits is what most closely resonates in the way in which they're wired, and therefore it feels right to their being. Self-identification and finding community helps people like us. It helps many of us feel like we belong, regardless of the official diagnosis. Most people would prefer official diagnosis, though they have had no choice but to accept that they may not be able to obtain one. I was lucky in this way. I also had some evidence, which was reported to be subtle but there, in terms of my clinical presentation. This was my childhood footage. It couldn't be denied. I also just fought really hard for the diagnosis too, finding that footage and presenting it. It was really hard. It was quite the battle, and not everyone is willing to put up such a battle, you know? I think eventually this entire situation will evolve in whatever way is most needed. I feel that eventually we can become a community and help each other at a mass movement level. This could possibly replace the need for those who may not meet clinical criteria to receive supports, but we're not there yet, so I'll stop there. The point is, self-identifying as autistic doesn't need to be so negated. It can be supported and accepted when the nature of it is better understood. Many people who identify as autistic have been badly misunderstood and mistreated as a result of their neurodifferences throughout their lives. This can slow down with finding community and with something to name and explain these differences, the true nature of our motivations for presenting behaviors, and how these motivations are coming from different places than what they may seem. The more support we can get from the public, the less we'll have to rely on official diagnosis to truly declare this difference. The more we are supported when we come out of the closet and self-identify, just as gays do, the less we'll be up against a backlash of criticism, skepticism, and cynicism. Ultimately, the more we're supported in this way, the more we can heal and find joy naturally, without having to enact such staunch and tireless efforts. Being mistreated is incredibly traumatizing to us, and many of us develop post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of this. The last thing we need when we try to come out of the closet is a negative backlash. This is, again, similar to the situation of someone coming out as being gay. It's hard enough, and the backlash just adds insult to injury. We can't help being autistic, not any more than one can help being gay. Nor is any of this actually a bad thing. It's not just about the challenge and the affliction. There are so many gifts and advantages associated with having an autistic brain. It's enough to write an entire blog, or maybe many of them. The negativity is stemmed from living a lifetime of differing to the norm, trying to fit in, and the inadvertent abuses we suffer because of it. For many of us, there are lasting effects to these things, such as acquired compromises to our health, our mental health, and most especially our physical health. The internal PTSD many of us have suffered can even play a large role in triggering immune disorders such as fibromyalgia. When we come forth and come out of the closet, we have many reasons. The ultimate reasons are for healing and happiness. Putting a name to and identifying our neurodifference serves as a catalyst for this, and it means so much to us. It is a crucial process. It can eventually bring recovery and inner peace as we become more in touch with our individualistic self, one in which has often been judged, shamed, and hurt. So the last thing we need, once in a state of delicate self-realization, is a negative backlash. We deeply need more individuals to be empathic, understanding, and supportive to our process. This is why we're working so hard to try and shift the way that people think about what being autistic means. It's no different to how hard the gay community has worked in order to try and soften the backlash of their members coming out of the closet by raising awareness. Of course, there will always be some degree of negativity and discrimination, just as the gay community continues to see. However, we can still try and lessen the degree in which it is still happening today. I believe we're in the beginnings of it, but there's far more potential for growth in this way. In lieu of this, please consider all of what I have just described to you, and please refrain from criticizing us as trying to label ourselves with an illness. Contrary to popular belief, it's not about the money, benefits, attention, self-pity, and so on. It's simply about self-identifying and healing. It's about reclaiming and repairing our identity. It's about finding community inclusive to our natural culture. See, we do not think of being autistic as an illness. We don't consider it as an illness. The mainstream may associate the word with that, but we think of it as a difference, and subsequently, a culture of people. When you criticize our naming of this difference, it is like criticizing a culture. Would you ever say to a First Nations person, "Don't label yourself," if they decided to begin using a traditional name which may reflect the nature of their tribe and their ancestors? Just like this, we know the name autistic to be a description of our culture, and not as an illness or a disorder. Yes, we may be affected more so by the chemicals in our environment. We are therefore more prone to illnesses such as deregulated immune disorders, autoimmunity, complex chronic disease. For this, your help and support is appreciated if there is awareness for the difference between our culture and our more likely proneness to these health afflictions. This is particularly because not only are we health affected, but we are prone to fall through the cracks regarding ethical and accurate treatment for our health issues. This is due to the way our differences in behavior cause our symptoms and concerns to present and be interpreted. So yes, we are affected, especially our immune and metabolic systems. Some of us are affected more severely and obviously by this, even to the point of being nonverbal. However, many nonverbal autistics share a similarly inquisitive and fluid way of thinking to those who are verbal. An example of this is Carly Fleischman, a very intriguing nonverbal autistic young woman whose way of thinking and belief system I can strongly relate with. Carly also talks about those with autism who are verbal and therefore more invisible. Check out the awesome and ultra clever Carly Fleischman and see for yourself. I'll add a link to her Facebook, and her Facebook page is called Carly's Voice. The autistic wiring itself is not an illness, though some of us are more severely physically affected by immune attacks that may interfere with the brain and speech. There is growing evidence that suggests those symptoms are not related to or affecting actual intelligence. Unfortunately, many nonverbal autistics remain trapped by their physical symptoms. Carly Fleischman has been an inspiration in terms of finding a way out of that, a modern-day Helen Keller. However, and sadly, many families are inhibited in terms of helping their nonverbal autistic child. Sometimes it's because of money. I don't want to go too much into that because I don't want to get into controversy. I'm just trying to cover some ground so that people don't think I'm forgetting about the nonverbal autistic population. Being autistic means having a brain based in a naturally different operating system. It's most likely based in an atypically reversed thinking process, objective first and then subjective, as opposed to the opposite, which is typical. This initial tendency to polyprocessing creates all kinds of challenges for us in typical social environments, in employment positions, in healthcare, in the ways in which we ask for help with our human afflictions, in society. We ask for your understanding, support, and possible enactment of allying advocacy. I'll summarize and close with the excerpt below from my blog, Different, Not Difficult. I ask that the anti-label people think twice before they criticize our need to call ourselves autistic people. We are autistic people, and we now have a term many of us use, AU. So it is for our identity, healing, closure, and true self-actualization that we become rightfully diagnosed and or identify as autistic. Naturally, we feel the need to clarify, to protect ourselves from further judgment and resulting discrimination. We desire to find peace with a more truthful representation of our identities, amid an unevolved and subjectively judgmental feudal society. The best way many of us have felt we can do this is naming ourselves as autistic. So, what's the harm in that? The underlying motivation for this labeling of ourselves, actually, follows the ideology of those who are, rightfully so, trying to discourage all this other subjectively judgmental over-labeling. In retrospect and in fairness, the world is still label and categorization dominant, and we can't change this instantaneously. Therefore, we meet it halfway with the closest label to our truth. I hope that this explanation will have those who are likely to be of the anti-label kind of people understand us better. People such as those coming from New Thought and spiritual communities, environmental and ultra-health conscious communities, nature lovers, etc. These people are most often anti-label, and we too understand why. To all of you non-autistic empathic friends, we share many of your beliefs. We are like-minded with you on many things. You may not entirely understand us, but what we appreciate is effort. And we want you to know that we're not merely and solely suffering from an environmentally induced illness to be pitied by. We also want you to know that it's frustrating to us when you shut us down by saying, "Oh, don't label yourself, just be." Although we may share like-mindedness to you in beliefs about health, environment, social justice, sustainability, and reform, we are still different in terms of our social communication style. Again, this is because we are different in terms of our base brain wiring. We still often have a harder time with spontaneity. We retain differences in learning. We are neurologically wired differently, and we may, in retrospect, have a strong word ability, but we are still consistent with autistic. There is a base behind this, if observed accordingly and thoroughly. So I hope that the above explanations make sense as to why we find it frustrating and even agonizing to be as continuously denied as we are currently being. We have often been through hellish experiences pre-identifying as autistic. The identification helps us heal, grow, and come together. In lieu of this, we ask for more support from non-autistic people from all backgrounds, general beliefs, and walks of life. We need as much understanding and compassion as we can get. We need research, eventual updated precedents, open-mindedness, acceptance, community inclusion, and for one to refrain from criticizing our choice to call ourselves autistic. Thank you. Sincerely, Rose Whitson Geddes.